and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. So let's jump right in. So the topic is sufficient logging and monitoring for your APIs, and that's also known as OWASP A10. And let me switch to the right. There we go. And I am Rob Dickinson. I'm CTO at Resurface Labs. I'm easy to find online after this talk on Twitter or by email. Our agenda for today will be introducing, for anybody who hasn't seen it already, what is OWASP A10. We'll be talking about some of the challenges with implementing the A10 directive, some best practices that overcome those challenges, and then there'll be quite a bit of content here about securing PII, because PII turns out to be one of the major challenges that holds people back in this area. So we'll really be going deep on that as one of the best sets of best practices that we could be using. So this is the OWASP top 10. I'm sure we've all seen this, and obviously not going to go through all this list, but just to point out that A10 is the last one on the list, and what that means is that if we're, in a nutshell, is that if we're running a digital property, that we really should have a surveillance camera for that digital property. We don't want attackers to be able to come onto our property and break in and be unaware that those activities are going on. So we need sufficient logging and monitoring to know that our systems are actually safe and that they're not being exploited. That sounds like a great idea, but in our experience and who we're talking to, the A10 directive is usually the least commonly addressed of all those other top 10 issues. And that's because it's hard. It's a simple idea, it's simple to state, but to actually do this is quite difficult and involves challenges on a number of different fronts. So why does this really matter? This really matters because to detect breaches, we have to have a way of monitoring and logging to be able to get to the point where we can detect these breaches, respond to these breaches. And the numbers that we've seen are very, very interesting. You know, almost a 50-50 split between the attacks that happen, you know, on purpose versus the attacks that are successful because somebody made a mistake. And that's, I think, really important. So about half the time, somebody's doing it to us, and about half the time, as technologists, we're doing this to ourselves. The common thread, though, in all these breaches, at least the vast majority, is that there's PII that's being targeted in this, and that makes sense because that's really what the attackers are out to get: is that real customer PII, the email addresses, the credit card numbers, you know, sensitive data that you can use for fraud. Or other kinds of crime. That's really what these breaches are all about. And unfortunately, the numbers are not great. These attacks tend to run for a long time. They do a lot of damage. And you know, just looking at the numbers, it's hard to believe that we're actually winning the war here online. So this is really one of the classic blunders that you can fall victim to in running a digital property today. It's very easy to lose a lot of money through these kinds of breaches. And is that problem getting worse? Yes, it is absolutely getting worse because we're moving to an API-centric economy. We're taking things that used to be internal and we're exposing them externally through these APIs. We're going to find that the pace of all these things actually accelerates. It's not going to get slower, it's going to speed up. These APIs are going to be used in unexpected ways. We're constantly changing them. The old ways of measuring are falling short in that a lot of our users used to be web users. And so you would instrument a web browser with a JavaScript agent, and that's how you'd get the data. But in the case of APIs, it's not just browsers. In fact, it's usually not browsers, but there's a huge diversity in the kinds of clients that are connecting. And so we need different tooling. A lot of the API owners that we talk to, they really lack that complete visibility into what's going on. And we know that security and privacy are not just ongoing issues, but they're actually moving targets. What we mean by security, what we mean by attacks, what kinds of attacks we're guarding against, that's a moving target. Also, our notions about privacy. When you look at things like GDPR, CCPA, those privacy directives are themselves moving targets. So all of these things come together to really create a huge observability problem in general, and specifically around detecting these breaches and knowing when your APIs are being used in ways that you didn't expect. So the A10 official recommendations are fairly simple to get your head around in terms of what are the ideas of what you actually need to solve for this. The primary things you have to have, obviously, is you need to have a centralized database, and you need to have that be an append-only store. You know, you're putting your logs, you're putting your monitoring data into this database, and you don't want hackers to be able to go in and change that database, right? A lot of the hackers will try to cover their tracks, and so having that in a centralized fashion, it's not on the host that's actually being exploited. The database lives centrally, and having it be an append-only store, that's a really, really strong, clear requirement. Another strong, clear requirement is we need to have enough storage in that database to enable forensic analysis. That's the whole point of this. You have to be able to go in and mine that data to find out what's going on. What you want ideally is you want automatic detection and alerting for suspicious activities. Again, these all come, as part of the A10 kind of official recommendations. In terms of the use case, you want that audit trail to cover things like logins, access validation failures, high value transactions, literally things in the real world that you would want to get a physical receipt for. You should have an audit trail of that. That's what should be in your database, and you should be able to mine that data. A very important consideration is that this data needs to be normalized across the different kinds of log sources that you have. This is actually itself one of the classic blunders that you can have with data logging systems in general. And it's really refreshing to see that called out specifically in the official recommendations, because the data that's going to be in this database and in the audit trail is really only as good as it was when it arrived and was normalized. So data hygiene, especially across a diversity of sources, is super important. We need protections against sensitive data leakage. That is an easy idea to say. It's a much harder idea to implement. And we're going to have a big section of content here in a few minutes that really goes into more of the details around this. But obviously, we're gathering sensitive data, even if it's not classic PII, to really be able to enable forensic analysis. You have to have enough detail to do that effectively. You're going to end up having sensitive details as part of that. And so now you have to have protections around handling that sensitive data, and that's super important. The last thing that A10 calls out is that you have to validate these logging systems. You have to train on these logging systems as part of your incident plan. It's certainly not enough just to put the technology in place. It's not enough just to gather the data. Your team really has to understand how to use this system, because when you're going to be using it, it's probably going to be under pressure as part of an incident. So again, this is kind of easy to say out loud, but what we're really talking about here, when you talk about a business implementation of these recommendations, this is pretty significant. This is not as easy as saying, let's scrub all our inputs for command injection, or let's guard against cross-site scripting attacks. This covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of complexity here, and these solutions can be very, very expensive. These all go into the reasoning why more folks aren't solving for A10 on a daily basis. So let's go a little bit more into what those challenges really look like and why this is so hard. It's hard to get started just gathering all this data, normalizing the data, dealing with the data hygiene. It's hard to get started. Then once you have all this data, it's hard to know what to look for. It's hard to know what signals to be paying attention to. A lot of the folks that we talk to are completely overwhelmed with the data that they have. These are much higher data volumes than just system logging events or APM logging events. We're talking about logging all of the activity, all of the usage. That is large data volumes, especially if your payloads are inherently large. There's significant assembly for this. Can you grab Splunk? Can you grab Elastic? Absolutely. You can grab a logging platform like that, but there's significant assembly required to get to something that actually meets all of those A10 directives. And then there's the notion of operational support. Who's going to run that system? This is a multidisciplinary initiative. This includes big data. This includes data analytics. This includes DevOps. It includes security. It includes privacy. Your legal team will be involved in portions of that. This covers a lot of ground. There's also limited talent out there to help build and assemble these systems. So all of this boils down to, and then the other things I almost skipped over here, but there's the potential for gatekeeping by the tech staff. You have staff that kinds of owns the system and locks it away, and no one else can really get to it. And the biggest challenge, as I mentioned before, is really securing PII at runtime. And when we talk to folks, that's really, you put all of this together, and it's kind of challenges across the board. There's no easy button here. It's not like you can just say, yeah, just don't pay attention to the stuff that's really behind the curtain. We're just gonna log all this stuff and it's gonna be okay. You really have to be prepared to get into all of these different kinds of challenges and solve a pretty broad set of problems here. And frankly, that's why more folks aren't solving for A10 on their own. Now, that said, now that we've sketched out what some of the challenges are around this, there are some very clear, easy best practices that we can adopt that really help cut through some of the noise that we get into. And really what this is about is it's about togetherness. It's about working together. It's about being able to share data, share telemetry with each other. That's really the aspiration here that's really, I believe, is behind the A10 directive. It's really about the idea of let's get on a road where we're taking this logging data, we're taking this alerting that we're getting, and we're really using that to break down some of these walls that exist between the development team and the security team traditionally, and to really create more of a DevSecOps culture where both the development team and the security analysts have common data sets to rally around and to really understand what's going on. Again, going back to those numbers about the breaches, if half of our breaches are coming from quality problems and half of our breaches are coming from active attackers, then just the development team on their own or just the security team on their own can't really solve that problem. It has to be the combination of all those people working together and creating that continuous improvement workflow. We also can't, another way of saying that is we can't live just on perimeter security alone. We have to better harden our systems to resist those attacks, and knowledge about those attacks and being able to observe those attacks is the first thing that you have to solve for to really be able to resist those attacks. In terms of making that easy, there is a generation of tools that are being built, and shameless plug, Resurface is one of these, that is really purpose-built around this use case of logging API usage. And what this does is this cuts down the cost pretty dramatically from the very high cost of taking something like an Elastic or a general purpose logging tool and adapting that to for an API logging kind of use case, dealing with all the data hygiene and the ingestion and all the stuff that comes into that, then setting up the dashboarding, setting up the alerting, loading all that knowledge into it. Resurface is one of the first products that's really showing the potential here to be able to cut through all of that and have a very easy turnkey platform that allows you to do zero-day analysis and have those embedded privacy and security controls so that you're not having to overlay these concerns over and over again. Once you have that system of record, the other thing that you're going to find is that it's not just useful for solving A10, but this also has benefits across the entire software development lifecycle. Obviously, we've talked a lot about here in production and production security monitoring. You know, that's the obvious. But again, this what we can really do with this is now take that next step towards feeding that information back into the other areas of the organization that can really benefit from it. If you think about it, one of the things that we hear from security people and people that work in production all the time is, I wish I could get my development team to care more about the quality problems we're having. I wish I could get my development team to care more about the security issues that we're seeing. But that's really hard to do if testing and QA is operating in their bubble and development saying, it works on my machine. We need to be able to take this data, take these logs about what's really happening in production and be able to provide that to the groups in our organizations that actually need that data, so that we're not all collectively guessing about what's really going on, that we really can take a data-oriented approach. So this is really the promise of A10. It's not just about sufficient monitoring and logging. It's really about putting yourself on a road to continuous improvement and being able to do that in a very well-informed, very empirical fashion instead of having to guess. So that's a great message. It's a great story. So hopefully I've convinced you that that's important, and that's a worthwhile, you know, that A10 should be on your list of things that you're trying to solve for. And another way of saying that is that this is a way for us to move from assuming that all of our attacks will be terminated at the perimeter to really acknowledging how often those attacks are actually penetrating the perimeter, how often those folks are actually getting inside and being inside our systems for a long time and doing damage for a long time. So we can't just play the whack-a-mole game of blocking people at the perimeter when they do bad things. We have to be able to sufficiently log and monitor what's going on our own digital properties and feed that information back into the organization so that we can really truly build stronger API services in the process. So again, that's the aspiration, and that sounds great. But again, why are people not doing this more? One of the key things that comes into this, and one of the key things that we hear just over and over and over again, is first of all, that there aren't enough turnkey solutions. And again, Resurface is one of the solutions that can be an easy button for that. But the thing that we hear a lot is, well, hang on, to really do that, I'm going to have to work with PII. Because if this data is highly anonymized, if it's only system monitoring data, that doesn't really tell me a lot about my attackers. It doesn't tell me a lot about the usage of that system. So when we're talking about sufficient logging and monitoring, it can't just be what code is running on the box. It can't just be what things are slow. It really needs to include what things are presumably working correctly. And to really understand all of that, you're ultimately going to have PII involved in that. You're ultimately going to want to know, well, what was the account that was being used? What was the user that was involved? That is a key part of this. But that is also, brings along its own requirements. And I think we all understand that once you make that decision and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and there's going to be PII involved, now your problem just got even tougher to deal with. So let's go through this. So already, maybe I'm triggering some feelings that you already have about PII, and that's good. It gives almost everyone a headache. Like, nobody hears about the challenges around PII and goes, yay, let's do, like, this is hard, right? These are hard topics to get into. There's a fair amount of denial that is still around this. I know GDPR is out there, but it's going to take a while for it to really happen. Let's just focus on something else. PII is not necessarily a favorite topic. There's also some folks that we talk to, just kind of a general sense of dread. Like, yeah, we're doing this. We know we can't keep doing what we're doing. We know that we're not really protecting this information the way that we need to. We know it's only a matter of time. And this really isn't going to work out very well, but we're doing the best that we can with what that we have available to us right now. So it's actually totally okay if you feel like this. And I'm going to give you a couple of very practical strategies that we can use to help cut through some of this, hopefully give you a little bit more comfort with some of these topics. The other thing, of course, that triggers a lot of us is that we know that insecure handling of PII is getting very expensive, whether that's admitting our breaches or however you want to break down the cost of that. There are really significant business level costs. So this is not a purely technical consideration. For businesses in general, this is your brand at stake. This is your reputation at stake. All right, so as we said, as soon as you go down this road and you're going to work with PII, you now have a really expansive set of challenges on top of all the other challenges that we already talked about for solving for A10. We have tightening regulations, things like GDPR, CCPA, that are slowly establishing higher levels of care, higher standards of care that are tougher to reach. We're seeing a very rapid rate of change in all of these regulations across the board. They're changing almost month to month, especially in Europe as new court cases are coming about and issued. We also have a really ever expanding definitions of what PII is really about. When I first got started doing this, PII was credit card numbers. Now those definitions have been expanded, and what is considered PII, I mean, under GDPR, it's what, 16, 18 different kinds of data elements, and that set of data elements is being expanded all the time. So that in itself, this is a highly moving target when we're going into this set of challenges. There's a lot of vendors, there's a lot of platforms where this data ends up living. All of those vendors and all those platforms have a slightly different take on how we're going to protect this information, where that information is stored, what database is used. And of course, there's a huge diversity here to consider. One of the other things that we hear about just all the time is, can we change the application or the database or not? Is the original development team involved? Was this an application that was bought from a third party that maybe the third party isn't prioritizing security and prioritizing handling of PII? And how do you wrangle that in that case? And again, that's one of those really persistent concerns, especially when you look at the rate of change. I mean, when you have a case where new kinds of data are being classified as PII, then the only way that you can react to that is seemingly to have an ability to change the app or change your databases to deal with that. But that's simply not the case with a lot of the folks that we talk to. You've grown through acquisition, you have development teams that have come and gone, and your ability to change things may not be that easy. And it certainly is not easy to change things across the board. There are also many, many, many different techniques for security and privacy protection. There's encryption, there's de-identification, there's dynamic de-identification. There are all kinds of tricks and techniques that we can use to protect this data, and there's no one size fits all for that. You can't just say, we'll encrypt everything, as an example. It's really not that easy. You have to pick the right technique for the right use case and to really understand. And so we're going to have to, first of all, we're going to have to couch all of this in the context of an API economy, right? We know that security and privacy of APIs is fundamentally different than for websites, because we're talking about programmatic access, and there's different ways to exploit that data. So I would hazard to say we're even having to invent new kinds of security and privacy protections for APIs that we've really never had to consider before. There is truly no easy button for this. You can't just get a PII solution in a box that handles this for all your data sources, for all your needs. That simply is not a practical way to approach this. And again, that's one of the things that makes it so challenging to implement something like A10. You can't just, other than resurface, maybe coming close, it's very difficult right now just to go out and buy a solution that is an A10 compliant solution that you can just roll in, that truly is an easy button. Again, other than something like resurface, that's really ostensibly designed to solve that kind of problem. There's a high cost of compliance and a high cost of non-compliance if you're getting into this business of storing PII. We also have to tackle notions like security by default. This is something that GDPR and CCPA emphasize, that both security by default and privacy by default, which is another one of those things that is really, really good aspirationally and in terms of setting this up as a standard of care, but not really helpful specifically in terms of saying, well, what specifically should those defaults be? The other thing that we mentioned, we were talking about the software development lifecycle, that really has a huge impact on this, is that we want to be able to legitimately share this data within our organization with the people who really need it. And because again, if we're anonymizing all this data to the point that you're losing the context of who the customer actually is, what do you do in that process? You anonymize all your data down to system level data. And that system level data is really only useful for engineering. Now, it's incredibly useful for engineering, but it's not helpful in terms of customer support. It's not helpful in terms of data analytics at the customer level, at the session level, and also at the session level or at the customer journey level. All of that requires having some notion of PII, some notion of some details at that level, and that can't just be held by the security team. It can't just be held by the development team. We need to get that data out to where it's needed. There's also new requirements that are coming into PII handling that we've really not seen before historically. I mean, you could say a lot of the things that we've talked about so far, they're not really GDPR specific or CCPA specific. A lot of the things that we've talked about so far really would fall under something like PCI, especially if you're talking about handling credit card numbers, for example. We've had pretty strong notions about data protections for that kind of PII for a long time. But if you haven't seen this yet, one of the things that GDPR and CCPA and similar legislation is going to bring with it is the right to erasure, or the right to be forgotten. So that means we need to be able to implement a revocation process for any of the PII that we're handling, for any of the systems that are involved in handling that PII. This is a really brand new idea. And getting back to that idea about there not being an easy button for this, there's very, very few databases that natively implement this concept yet. The idea that as a consumer, I should be able to say, hey, I'm revoking my rights for you to use my data anymore. And how does the business, how does the DevOps team actually implement that requirement in a way that's easy? Again, part of the problem here is that there's a lot of vendors, there's a lot of platforms, this data gets stored in a lot of different ways. And it's difficult to go back and change these applications. So you think about, this as a highly moving target, right? In some ways, our systems are fundamentally brittle, and now we're having to address new requirements that we've never really heard of before, like revocation, in the context of apps that may be extremely difficult or literally impossible to change. You can see why, as we're going through more and more and more of this list, a lot of folks wash out on the side of maybe we just shouldn't do this. Maybe the challenges here are just too steep to really want to get into all this. The other thing that should be always on our mind is that all of these systems, regardless of how good we think they are, they're always vulnerable to zero-day failures and attacks. And so that is also a very scary idea, that you could go through a lot of work to identify the requirements that you need to meet for security, for proper handling of PII, and that you can still have a vulnerability in that system that can be exploited at any time in a way that you didn't expect. And again, just to keep beating this drum, but in the context of applications that may be difficult to change, or databases that may be difficult to change, or applications that are fundamentally evolving very quickly and moving very quickly, and that velocity and that rate of change means that you're constantly exposing new ways of being exposed through zero-day failures and attacks. And that threat never really goes away. When it doesn't have to be 0 day is the other variation of that, right? As we all know, that could very well be a case where you made a mistake 2 years ago, and someone just figured out how to exploit it in some really, really clever way that no one ever thought about in advance. And suddenly you have to be able to respond to that because you're leaking PII. One of the things that we keep coming back to here in this theme is that how to get developer attention around these things. Our developers that are maintaining these systems have a lot on their plate. There are a lot of different things that they're trying to do. They're trying to build new features. They're trying to improve quality. They're trying to include performance. They're trying to build scale. There's so many things that go into that. It's really hard to get developers' attention especially in a field like this that is very quickly moving, is very nuanced, and truly takes a lot of education to get comfortable with the subject matter. All right, so another way to put this is to, and kind of a fun way of put this, and a way to tell a couple stories here, is to talk about some anti-patterns around how to handle PII and to deal with user privacy. So let's just assume that we're going to do the A10. Let's assume that we need that surveillance camera for our digital property, and we want to be able to detect these things. We're going to be gathering this PII. And so what are some easy ways that this whole thing can go wrong? And we can just blow ourselves up and really wrap ourselves around the axle here. And I think I've seen like almost all of these myself, not at Resurface, but in other places that I've worked over the years. One very, very crisp, clear anti-pattern that you should know when you see it is the no PII here strategy. This is the strategy that says we're just going to anonymize all of our data, and we don't really deal in customer data. We don't really deal in that kind of stuff. And you can almost hear how ludicrous it sounds out loud, right? Because what business doesn't have customers? What organization, you know, sustains itself without managing to have any PII? Even if you're a nonprofit, even if you're not a commercial entity, you probably still have a subscriber base of some kind, or you have a group of mobile users, or you have some kind of group. Anytime you have humans, you have PII. So you will hear some folks, you know, some of the denialists that are out there. It's like, it's okay, GDPR is fine, we're not going to worry about that because we'll scrub out all of our PII before it gets to us, and we won't really have to worry about it. Well, guess what? We're in a landscape where that idea of what is PII is constantly expanding. So good luck with that. The antithesis of that perspective is we'll treat all of our data like it's PII. And that sounds good, maybe, until you think it through. It's a little bit like saying plutonium is dangerous, therefore we'll just treat everything like it's plutonium in the physical world. That would be ridiculous, right? That would not be a very economical way to address those issues. But I have myself had managers at times that have tried to mandate this as kind of a shortcut to PII compliance, and it doesn't really work. You're always going to have to fit the data to the use case, fit the protections to the use case, and go from there. The other thing that I've seen, I won't say where I saw this, but you have what's basically an impossible approval process. You'll say, oh yeah, there are ways that we can gather new PII, but it needs to go to legal, it needs to go to the executive team, it needs to have this sign off and that sign off. And basically nobody ever gets through that process. Like you just lose interest and say, we'll just live without the sufficient logging bit because we'll never be able to get it approved. Another classic anti-pattern is having what we call God mode administrators, people that can see everything about anything whenever they want to. If you have a culture that is built around that idea, that can be very difficult to unwind, very difficult to unwind. And we'll talk about why. Failing to get user consent. This is a new concept. This is a GDPR, CCPA kind of concept. This is the idea that our systems should be private by default, secure by default. So part of that is that the consent to be monitored has to be an explicit opt-in. It can't be monitoring by default. That creates some real challenges here. So how do you get user consent? You either ask for it, or you have specific areas of your application that are governed by specific terms and conditions where you're specifying the context where you need to get consent. The other thing about CCPA and GDPR is a lot about getting user consent is also whether the data stays first party or whether that data is shared with a third party. And you have different requirements based for around user consent specifically based on, so I got ahead of my bullet there, but based on whether that data is being shared with a third party. And that makes sense, right? So failing to get user consent or just automatically sharing that data with third parties, that is going to run you afoul of things like GDPR and CCPA that really have a lot of specific language and specific teeth around governing, especially governing the third-party data transfers and requiring you to have user consent for third-party data transfers that aren't explicitly required for the transaction that the user is trying to conduct with you. All right, so a lot of those that we've talked about so far are kind of cultural anti-patterns. Those are mistakes that your managers might make or your architects might make from that perspective. There's a whole nother set of anti-patterns in terms of the technology that you should be aware of and you should be attuned to. And I want to thank Paul for asking the question up front. Is there such a thing as too much logging? Yes, there actually is. And it is an anti-pattern, and it's called the honeypot. You take all your data and you put it in this one giant database, and everybody wants to get in there and get it. You know, if you have one database that has all your credit card numbers, for example, then that ends up being a honeypot. If you're logging too much PII and not protecting that data properly in this database, that is going to increase your probability of getting breached. It's going to increase the chances of financial damages, either from a breach or from something like a GDPR or CCPA damage award. You know, as much as we want to centralize this data, get all this data in one place, yes, you absolutely can log too much, especially if you don't have proper protections in place. And so that's one of those things, like if you hear like, oh, we're just going to take all this data and we're going to put it in this one giant database. Ooh, yeah, really? I mean, the hair on the back of your neck should start to stand up a little bit. Overly destructive transforms are another example of this. We'll just destroy all the PII. We won't be able to recreate it. Like, that's great. You protect the PII, but you lose all your observability. Another thing we see all the time is just doing the one-time masking. We'll mask out the data. We'll do that at right time, and then that's okay. Like we'll be set from then on. You know, perimeter security will be enough. We'll just encrypt everything, and we'll really just be thinking about this in production. These are really all examples of ways that you're handling a PII can go terribly, terribly wrong. So let's give you some specific strategies in the time that we have here left together to go through some of the positive ways that we can actually deal with this. You need to recognize that people are always the weakest link. And when we're talking about security in general, or we're talking about PII specifically, it's all about the people. And what you're always trying to do in security is you're trying to optimize for the number of conspirators that are required to pull off that attack. And it's really as simple as that. So we want to take our permissions. We want to be able to express group level and user level permissions. We want to be able to express those very narrowly. We want to be able to change those very fluidly at runtime to be able to respond to things like zero-day attacks or zero-day failures that we didn't think of in advance, and be able to not just have those permissions, but make them easy to change. And we want to regularly audit those permissions to make sure that we're doing the right things. On the technology side, this means that our data needs to be siloed. If our people are the weakest link and we need to optimize for the number of conspirators, then Conway's law says that we also need to break our organization into those silos. Our data needs to be siloed. Those permissions need to be siloed. And actually, the natural course of APIs moving towards microservices is great for this, because now you can express those group level permissions and those user level permissions at the microservice granularity. And that's a really natural fit for the databases then that live behind that microservice, or the permissions that the team in that area and the data that that team should really have to be able to access. We can then optimize for the number of silos that have to be breached to carry out a successful penetration of the application. Then a couple more things very, very specifically. We want to keep that data close to the source. So resist that urge to centralize everything in one place. Like, yes, A10 says that you want to have centralized data collection, but what they really mean is that the data shouldn't be stored on the host where an attacker who's exploiting that host can delete all of the logs. You want to create a centralized database for those logs within every microservice environment, so that it's not enough just to exploit a host, you have to exploit the whole silo. But at the same time, you want to keep that data close to where it was generated, close to the API that generated it. Part of GDPR and CCPA, we can then roll that data off automatically, expire that data when we don't need to have it anymore. We can monitor actively PII transfer, and we can also virtualize access to raw data. So that's the potential. There's so much that we could be doing around A10, but in order to really solve for A10, we have to also solve for some of these privacy and PII concerns. We really can go from a place where we don't really feel like we're having a great time to a place where we really feel like we are understanding how our APIs are being used and how they're being exploited, and we can sleep well at night. Thank you so much for having me here.